Sacrificial lamb, you will receive our most sacred body. It begins now.
Well, it's finally here. I say finally, it was only actually announced back in June of last year, but a Resident Evil 4 remake has been on the wish list of fans for quite some time now. It does not feel like it has been 18 years since the original first release on the GameCube, with box art that gave 12-year-old me the creeps. And there were other games in the series I would have been more eager to see remade first, like Code Veronica, but now having finished this remake, there is one thing I am certain of. Resident Evil 4 2023 is probably the greatest remake of any game I have ever played, period. It is ridiculously good. With so many remakes currently releasing, they should all really take note of what Capcom have done here and aspire to be this great. I praised the Dead Space remake in one of my previous reviews, and as much as I enjoyed it, Resi 4 blows it out of the water like fishing with grenades. There is so much polish here in all it has to offer, and honestly it makes me a little nervous for the future. I was more excited for the Silent Hill 2 remake over this, but my god, Bloober Team are going to have to make wine from water with that game for it to compete with the sheer brilliance of this. Now, for better or for worse, Resident Evil has always been a franchise of evolution, in and of itself and for the survival horror genre, being one of the most influential and iconic series to grace our screens, all the way back to when people would say, wow, is that a whole 19 inches when they saw my TV, amongst other things.
I can see you're thinking.
Resident Evil 1 basically started survival horror, with its own remake showing how games could be upgraded for the better. Let's see, Resi 6 had a good logo design, Resi 7 copied PT but was actually very good, and Umbrella Corps proved online Resi just does not work. But most of all, Resident Evil 4 perfected and popularised the over-the-shoulder perspective in third-person shooters. Now, I do not think this remake will be as historically groundbreaking as the original, but if you look up the definition of remake in the dictionary, you will find Resident Evil 4, with Resi 2 being in the thesaurus. Similar to how the original set the bar for third-person action games in 2005, Capcom is again at the top of their game, setting a new bar of how a game should be remade. So yeah, it's pretty friggin' incredible.
Thanks.
6 years after the Raccoon City incident, Leon Kennedy has gone through vigorous military training and is now in the US President's detail and has been tasked with rescuing the President's daughter, who has been kidnapped and tracked to an isolated Spanish village. Upon arrival, the residents are more evil than ever before, hostile, crazed, and smarter than any zombie Leon has encountered. The game's core goal is to rescue Ashley from Los Iluminados, a group of villagers and sadistic cultists whom have been corrupted by a mysterious parasite known as La Plaga, arachnid-like parasites that embed themselves in any living organism it can get its grips on, and it is down to you to get in, rescue the hostage, and get out before you meet your grisly fate. The story is more or less beat for beat as the original, however it does a good job at expanding upon and mixing up the plot and characters we meet. The opening cutscene, for example, shows a bunch of cultists barbarically sacrificing a young woman, which helps set the scene with its tone and the fact that this is a deeper dive into the story, offering a much more engaging and comprehensible narrative. Being a continuation of the Resi 2 remake, it has a far more serious and darker feel to it, and has somewhat been grounded in reality. Now I use the word reality with a fistful of salt, because this is of course a Resident Evil game.
Jesus Christ!
But Capcom have already cut down on the goofy, over-the-top cheeseball writing and scenarios in favour of a more convincing approach, and because of this, the game feels more balanced in its tone and world building, but without sacrificing the fantastical elements that really made Resi 4 a standout for the franchise.
I would like you to hand the girl there over to me. Now.
Yeah, fat chance, Ramon. The girl's just fine. With me.
Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy.
The incredible roster of characters remain as memorable as ever. After the night of his life back in Raccoon City, Leon is no longer a rookie. You can really see this iteration of the character's progression, now being a capable, focused and badass government agent. It's a much more fleshed out personality, still making one-liners, but more in an effort to get through the situation rather than being a Giga Chad, giving his John Wick-esque physical prowess much more believability. He truly is one of gaming's favourite protagonists, and this really showcases as to why. The character building continues through the game in the relationship between Leon and Ashley. Over the course of the game, their relationship develops as Leon protects her through all the challenges they face, and you can see this in the dialogue they have with each other. Ashley throws banter at Leon, little jokes, and becomes more comfortable with him as the game goes on, much of which pays homage to the original game if you are familiar with it.
Leon, what are you doing?
Don't even think about trying this yourself.
Me? As if.
Ashley finds it absurd that Leon would use a chandelier as a jump pad, or that he will catch her if she jumps out of a window, something that happened over and over again in the original. He will comfort her into the jump, and by the end of the game, she does it with an unclenched butthole just like it is another Tuesday. Character development at its finest. This is the game's writing at its best, building their companionship, but do not be fooled. This is still a Resi script after all, and some of that good cheese remains. It's just more of a mild cheddar as opposed to a blue cheese.
Present for you.
Famous bingo line is still there, and Leon acts like a little Chad once he starts getting his confidence, but ultimately he has a job to do and the safety of Ashley is all that matters. I can see fans being a little displeased perhaps with the more serious approach, as the original was very quotable and has become a meme in and of itself. And I do think it's fair to say the remake does lose some of that quirky charm that was so lovable. However, we are no longer in the 90s or early noughties, a time where cheesy action heroes are all the rage, and tone here is definitely more in line with the current times of much darker, brutal renditions of action heroes. It made sense to do this, and I really like the direction they took with the two lead characters, particularly Leon's shift in character from Resi 2 to 4. Some of the writing is questionable and does trip up on itself. An example of this is everyone involved in Leon's mission has been given codenames. Ashley's is Baby Eagle, pretty cool, adding to that realism factor, but Leon will refer to her as Baby Eagle on the radio and then immediately refer to her as the president's daughter. I'm not quite sure he understands the purpose of codenames.
Such a gentleman.
Other characters, such as Louis Serra, have much more screen time this time around, accompanying you in sections of the game you rode solo in the original, and Ada Wong is here, and Resident Evil 4 still has the series' best selection of villains in one game.
I am Osman Sadler, the speaker for our Lord.
Tell someone who gives a shit.
Foolish lambs.
They too have that more serious tone, but they are still just as eccentric. If anything, they are more menacing, and their backstories and motivations have been fleshed out through additional cutscenes and collectible diary entries. I love learning the backstories as we built up towards our inevitable confrontations. Some made you hate the characters, some made you sympathise with them to some degree. I heard rumours prior to the game's release that they were going to cut Jack Krauser from the game, but I'm so glad that these were false, because his character provides some tense encounters with Leon, and there is so much more depth to their relationship. Sadler, Salazar and Mendez all return and have adequate screen time, except for the latter, Mendez, the big cheese, who is my personal favourite and one who remains criminally underutilised. Imagine if this guy stalked you throughout the village like Mr. X in 2 or Nemesis in 3, even if that was just watching you within the trees and giving you a chase from time to time. They do tease this a little before his boss battle, but it's over pretty quickly. A larger group of villains does remove the series' signature stalker villain, but thankfully all the villains we have here are lovable brats in their own segments of the game.
Hasta luego.
I think the story of Resident Evil 4 stands the test of time due to its simplicity with the rescuing the princess from the castle storyline, and its ability to stand on its own within a pretty convoluted narrative across the franchise's timeline. No umbrella here or big company men, just a bizarre cultist theme in this remote village which is horrific and interesting. It always made for a nice change of scenery, and it's a pleasure to return. Which leads me into the game's presentation. The village, castle and the island. 3 wonderful locations have been recreated with such class. The RE engine used by Capcom continuously impresses with how much detail goes into their games. It looks phenomenal. The lighting, landscapes, structures, creatures and characters all look exceptional, and whilst at a rare few times I do think the Resi 2 remake perhaps looked a little more pristine, that game was smaller in scale with its dark corridors and night setting. Resi 4 is so much grander in its offering that I think a few lesser detailed textures at times is acceptable considering the scale of this in comparison. It's all been meticulously designed, and each area offers so much variety and detail that it never allows itself to become stale or repetitive, all while staying within the realms of this beautiful hellhole. Capcom managed to recreate this world in such a way that as a returning player it felt completely different, yet so very familiar. What is better than ever are the character models, facial animations and a whole new category: video game hairstyling. We have really come into a time where characters are more human than human. Leon's emotional journey can be told just through his looks. Yeah, he gets dirty and beaten throughout the game, but it's those damn eyes which shows a man's real pain. How much care the developers put into this game and the attention to detail, and that goes for the sound design too. The voice acting is great, I really like the voices, but my days it is the music and environmental sound design that wins the biggest praise here. Whether it be the game's incredibly frantic gauntlets or the quieter spooky moments, the 360-degree audio both helps in understanding where the threats are, building the solid atmosphere, and also pushes you to finally wash all that laundry as you have run out of fresh white undies. way it blends its diegetic and non-diegetic sounds is simply astonishing. The screams, groans and chants of the Ganados and cultists perfectly blends with the music, creating an audible smoothie for the ears. It sounds as though they experimented with the sounds to be part of the game's score, and it all comes together in some operatic masterpieces, rivaling that of, say, From Soft games.
Oh, Senor.
Very well done, pumping out enough atmosphere and tension that it could be cut with a knife. Speaking of knives, it's time to talk about the true sacred body, the gameplay. A good remake should be able to capture the essence of an original piece of work whilst modernising it for a modern audience and fans alike, and Resi 4 does this without hesitation. It takes the ferocious formula of the original and injects it with a bunch of steroids. It does this with both improvements to the already great gameplay loop and by implementing new mechanics that were honestly a huge surprise. This is Resident Evil just as you know and love, and unlike anything you have seen before. Just as it was back in 2005, Resi 4 is a different kind of beast when compared to the more recent Resident Evil 2 remake or later set of sequels that reinvigorated the series, starting with Resident Evil 7. Slow burn survival horror was left behind in Raccoon City, but this is no less horrific or a fight for survival. Resi 4's horror always came from the chaotic, overwhelming, fierce combat, and here it has been ramped up to 11. If you are someone who has mastered the OG game, then you may be pleased to know this is no cakewalk. Starting with the game's difficulty options for a first playthrough, you have Assisted, Standard, and Hardcore. Assisted being a story mode with less damage received, more given, and generous resources, this allows players to casually play through the game. Then we have what are perhaps two difficulty settings that are quite misleading. Standard is suggested as the difficulty for those who have never played the original game, whereas Hardcore emphasises itself for those who have played it. Well, this is like saying if you have ridden a bike before, you ought to be able to ride a unicycle whilst juggling a variety of fruits. Hardcore is hard to the core, especially for a first playthrough. I tried this on my first go, trusting that of the difficulty description, and let's just say I had my arse handed to me on a bloody platter. I played a little, but I restarted on Standard because for my first playthrough I wanted a less frustrating and more enjoyable experience, and even then, it definitely had its challenge. Once you finish the game, you unlock Professional mode, which I am currently playing through, skipping Hardcore altogether because I love seeing my ass on that platter. Core gameplay loop will see you traversing through the locations, solving puzzles, collecting resources, fighting your way through gauntlet after gauntlet of a huge variety of enemies. Packs of villagers wielding pitchforks, torches and axes, followers of Sadler equipped with mind-blowing parasites, shields and bows, and some of the most unique foes seen in a Resident Evil game like the Garradors and Regenerators, just to name a few. Each creature the game throws at you has its own weakness and ways to kill it, consistently shaking up the gameplay formula that it never becomes a tiresome game of point and shoot. Enemies can be staggered by shooting their weak spots. These can be legs, heads, or the La Plaga once it has decided to show itself. You have to be fast, on the move, and adapt to the enemies and their smart AI. Enemies will duck when you shoot, charge you, throw weapons at you, swarm you until you feel overwhelmed. You will continuously be fighting various enemies at once, and it relies on player skill and thinking. The Garradors, for example, are blind and react to sound. When fighting off against two of these and a whole bunch of cultists, it seems like an impossible task, but use the surrounding bells and even a gunshot across the room, you can trick those Garradors into taking out the grunts for you. The combat is at its absolute best when it presents you with these moments. Different enemies coming at you all at once can put you in a state of panic, and you have to use different tactics to defeat them, adapting to the situation. I mean, this moment when all these guys ran into this room shattering 4 regenerator chambers made me need a pee-pee, not gonna lie. The game has a very smart way of making you feel like you are getting by just with the skin of your teeth, thanks to the constant aggressive nature of the combat, making its own brand of survival horror. The pacing is relentless and is something that has been improved since the OG. Last time I played Resi 4 2005, there were moments in the game that became tedious or just the pacing was off. Here it feels as though the fat has been trimmed, and whilst the game still took me just shy of 20 hours to finish, which included me taking my time, collecting all the treasures and completing all side quests, it in no way felt that long, and I would have happily sunk more hours into it. Leon can now aim and walk, no longer having to stop in his tracks. Ammo and healing items can be crafted on the spot with resources. He can now crouch and sneak around, taking out as many enemies as possible one by one before someone inevitably sees you and the onslaught begins. A good portion of the game requires you to escort Ashley just as in the original, and while she does not do much more than run and hide, her AI is smarter and I found I had much less trouble with her being kidnapped or down this time around. She can hide in lockers, and you can command her to follow or spread out to remove her from the crosshairs. Resource management remains a big part of the game with your limited resources and inventory space. Weapons, attachments, ammo, grenades, healing item, fish and eggs will all be stored in your briefcase that can be enlarged over time. At the typewriter you can store unused weapons to make more space, but one thing I found interesting, and if I'm not mistaken this is new, is that you cannot put ammo, herbs or other miscellaneous items into storage. Only weapons, their attachments and first aid sprays. This prevented any stockpiling of resources, but I did find myself carrying ammo for weapons I would not be using, like crossbow bolts, and if I wanted the space I would have to use them or lose them, either by using that weapon for a bit or by discarding the ammo or selling it to the merchant. The same merchant everybody loves from the OG game, used for buying and selling items and upgrading weapons.
Over here, stranger.
Honestly though, I don't remember him being this annoying. He talks way too much, a lot of it repeated dialogue. He does have more dialogue than the previous game, but I think that is actually the problem. In the original I think it was a case of less is more. But you can't hate him too much as he does sell an impressive arsenal of weapons. Most guns are procured through him, with a few being found out in the wild. I did think perhaps some of the weapons would be different here, but ultimately it's the same selection as the OG. Variety of handguns, shotguns, rifles, machine guns, throwables and a rocket launcher each have their stats. Power, ammo capacity, reload speed, rate of fire, and a special unlock by either upgrading all other stats and spending a higher price for the final upgrade, or by using an express pass to that upgrade with one of the merchant's tickets. Sold in his trade store by buying special items with gems. Gems are obtained through completing merchant quests, new additional side quests in which most aren't too interesting, and more of a reason to just revisit locations. These include objects like shooting down all blue medallions in an area or killing rats. The more interesting ones do require you to kill a stronger variation of an enemy, acting as sub-bosses. These are pretty cool. Despite all the nerve-prodding assaults, the weapons and tools at Leon's disposal feel incredibly powerful, especially after a few upgrades. Some of the most brutal shotguns around, blowing off heads and limbs of those in your way, to pistols that are different enough to find your favourite, the Punisher having a higher rate of fire to plaster an enemy with rapid shots, or the Red 9 that has a pretty mental recoil but will blast that parasite to Kingdom Come. The most surprising addition to Leon's arsenal has to be the knife. Now you may be thinking, he has always had a knife, but this time around we have a whole new parry mechanic.
Quick! Didn't I teach you? Knives are faster.
Resident Evil was never a game where I thought, you know what this could use? A knife to parry a chainsaw. The person who came up with that idea is an insane genius, as now I could not imagine a third-person Resi game without it. It's quite brilliant and so satisfying to use, and pretty much anything can be parried if timed right, and stronger attacks that cannot be parried can be dodged with pressing the button prompt on screen. This made melee combat far more prominent and a great way to reserve ammo when going one-on-one with an enemy. Even throwables like axes and bloody Molotov cocktails can be parried out of the way. It's absolutely bonkers but fits so well. This isn't exploitable either, as knives do have durability and they will break after so much usage, so best to use them wisely, and I recommend upgrading the knives' damage and durability pretty early on, as it did save my skin many times. Parrying can even be done in the game's boss battles, all of which have been recreated on an impressive scale. Salazar is no longer stuck to a wall, making for a funner fight. Huts are no longer safe against the giant, and all the bosses are just far more aggressive, but the better movement of Leon and that parrying mechanic alone gives you a fighting chance. I cannot talk about the boss fights and not mention Krauser, which is by far the best boss fight in the game. A huge improvement over the original. There's just so many layers to it, from intense knife fights, trapped-filled tombs and sniper standoffs. I was on the edge of my seat and loved every second of it. The battle chat between the two, the whole thing was like a boss fight straight out of a Metal Gear game. Very impressive, and I could replay it over and over again. Some bosses like the U3 have been removed, and iconic moments such as running from the boulder and the Salazar statue chasing you has been changed from a giant walking mech to just a rotating head that spits fire at you. But I never felt as though anything was missing, and most of all, if not all changes, were for the greater good for the pacing of the game, which is breakneck speed. It is Resident Evil 4 again, but better. Capcom took arguably the best Resident Evil game of all time, one of the best games of all time period, and remade it again. This is a must play for anyone and everyone. For those who have not played the original, do I think this replaces the need? Well, it kind of depends. If you're going to play just the one title, then yeah, Resi 4 Remake is absolutely the way to go, but I do still recommend the original. It is pretty dated in comparison, but it just has that weird charm to it that is somewhat missing from this game. But the two are great in their own right, so I don't think this replaces the original, but instead is the perfect companion piece to one of gaming's most historical titles. And that's it from me. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked the video. Let me know what you thought of the game in the comments. Did you like it as much as I did? Did you not? Hit that thumbs up button if you liked the video, thumbs down if you didn't, and subscribe to the channel to catch all my videos. Enjoy the rest of your day, and see you on the next one.